Hate to look, the garage doors open. There I stand.
The time of year right now for us to be.
You already know what.
They
For us
know
to be
they
busy.
know they can get a head start then.
Get your gavel.
Oh, I'll get them here in just a minute. That was at 9:01. That was at 8:59.
Just chatty.
Just right before we started.
It's a 10% chance of rain.
How much more is it Thursday?
30. Well, I knew it was somewhere in there.
Yeah, that cold front's gonna hit tomorrow. It's
I
gonna be
know,
all the way down to
92.
92.
Oh man, I'm telling you.
I'm gonna mow the grass tomorrow night when I get home.
Pull out the quilts.
Yeah. Going to Lubbock anyway. It'll be really cold up there tomorrow. Ooh.
Maybe in the low 80s.
Yeah.
High 80s.
Going for a Sonic Green.
All right.
Not mine.
Grandpa number 2 though.
Yep.
Well, are we gonna have this one before the other one?
It's a race.
It's gonna be a race.
It's gonna be a race to see who. It
gonna
Cass's
start your
delivery
remodeling
date's
now.
the 23rd
When remodeling?
of December, and I don't know when Taylor's.
Oh, the store, yeah, that's what we're hoping, October.
Good morning, everyone.
That's our goal.
Okay, I'm gonna call this meeting of the Sweetwater City Council to order and ask Ryan Straybeck from First United Methodist Church to do the invocation, and Councilman Castro to lead us in the pledges.
Would you pray with me? Almighty God, we give voice to our gratitude this day for your provision of daily bread, for the city of Sweetwater and the potential for life. Thank you for leadership who serve and give attention to quality and sustainability of day-to-day life as we know it and look for it. Please grant wisdom and courage and patience for today's work. Through Christ we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Please join me in the pledge of allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
Okay. Now gonna. Is that a proclamation for American Indian Week for this week? Whereas Texas hosts nearly 25,000 megawatts of wind power capacity, rating number one in the nation for producing enough electricity to power about 7.3 million average homes. Whereas Texas is home to 143 wind farms and 46 wind-related manufacturing facilities. Whereas wind farms in Texas attracting over $46.5 billion in private investment today, whereas wind farms generate $237 million in state and local taxes and more than $70 million in land lease payments each year from Texas community landowners. Whereas wind power opportunities for over 25,000 men and women in our state that are directly employed by the wind industry. Now therefore, I, Jim McKenzie, Mayor of the City of Sweetwater, on behalf of the entire City Council, do hereby proclaim August 11th through 17th, 2019 as American Wind Week.
Thank you.
Well, we're now going to move on to the next item, which is another presentation from the City Council and City Administration to recognize city employees who were selected to the Sweetwater Reporter Reader's Choice Awards. We know that everybody reads the Sweetwater Reporter, and we're made aware of the fact that we have three employees, three highly skilled, highly talented, highly dedicated employees that were honored not by the city only, but by the residents of this community. for doing outstanding work. They're being recognized by the reporter for that fact. And we have the 3 employees here today, so if y'all can come up here, we just kind of want to take this opportunity to recognize you on behalf of the city council, on behalf of the city administration, and just thank you for your work. So if y'all 3 could come up here, and I see all y'all here. This was from, I think maybe a week ago, Joseph, is when this came out or so. So we just want to recognize Officer Clint Allen, who was voted best police officer in town. That's quite an achievement. Ms. Phyllis Brinkman, who was voted the best city employee. That's saying something, isn't it? We got a lot of employees. And Fire Chief, I like this one, Fire Chief Grant Madden, voted best hero in town.
All right.
All right. Do we get the pictures and everything so we can put them on social media? Thank y'all. Thank y'all.
All right. Move on to 5B, which is a presentation from Andrew Friedman with Samco Capital Markets regarding proposed financial strategies.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor, council members. Andrew Friedman with Samco Capital Markets, financial advisor to the city. Ms. Torres contacted me a week or 2 weeks ago as you all are getting into your upcoming budget and discussing the many needs of the city and the community. Wanted to go over some financing strategy and really just have a conversation with you all, answer questions as they come up as to some of, I guess, the strategy and logic to the different types of debt that you can issue and strategy for doing so. One of the things that was that we discussed was a need for equipment that would be paid for typically from the general fund of the city. And so as we look at that, one of the best mechanisms for doing so, again, this is equipment that would be paid for from your ad valorem tax side, not your utility side. And the reason we look at that separately, and you all are a bit unique because you rely very much on your utility system to support operations of the city, is rating agencies and bond investors look at what they call structural balance when they're examining a city's creditworthiness. And that is the utility fund paying for its own improvements through its revenues and rates that it's generating, and is the general fund paying for its improvements, whether it's street improvements, capital assets related to maintaining the streets, city hall, things of that nature. Are those being supported through the ad valorem taxes? And what they would consider a structural imbalance is when a city becomes very reliant on its utility system in order to support general fund operations, and vice versa. If you're levying a tax to support your utility system because the rates that you've set on the water and wastewater side aren't sufficient to cover its operations. So they want to see a structural balance. So with that in mind, I took a look at, if you have general fund needs, whether it's paving equipment or whatever those capital assets might be, our first take on that is issue tax notes, certificates of obligation, or general obligation bonds that would be secured by and paid for from your ad valorem tax rate. And so this top sheet is just a very, very simple, because you don't have any debt currently supported by your ad valorem taxes, at what an $800,000 tax note paid back over 7 years, what that would take in terms of pennies of additional tax rate that you don't currently have. And it's roughly 2.5 cents per $100 of valuation in order to support that debt. That's roughly $125,000 a year. And then the table below that breaks down what that annual and monthly impact would be on a homeowner at different values. This is a very, very rudimentary analysis, mostly because you don't currently have any debt, but this is what we call a tax rate impact analysis, and it's something that we use when putting together a small bond program like this, all the way up to a $300 million bond program that a school district might be looking at. It's the same fundamentals at work here, but it basically, we're assuming a certain level of growth in your tax base year over year. In this case, it's about 3% annually for 5 years. And then we make an assumption as to the interest rate we think we'd lock in on that tax note. And so that's how we come up with that. You can see if you had a $200,000 house, it would cost you roughly $54 a month, $54 a year, to support this additional debt. So you can extrapolate out, and we can certainly run different scenarios for different size projects, things that you're considering. One of the things that makes you all unique is your utility system is a big part of the operations of this city generally. And I know from visiting with Ms. Torres and from looking at your audit, you've got a lot of fund balance, a lot of cash in that utility system that you all may be interested in using for different projects, whether they're utility system projects or potentially for what we consider general fund projects. And you know, how much of that cash should you or would you want to use in order to complete those projects becomes a little bit more nuanced. The rating agencies do like to see that you have a certain amount of cash on hand or fund balance held back in reserve for a rainy day. And they like to see on your general fund that you maintain at least 25% of your annual expenditures held in fund balance so that you can withstand, you know, a downturn in the economy, whether your sales tax drops off due to a recession, whether your property values decline due to, you know, oil and gas markets, or just a general recession that we might see. On the utility fund side, they like to see an even higher number, and the reason for that is utility system revenues can be a little bit fickle. You have a really wet spring, you're not going to sell as much water. If you've got a really warm winter, you know, you might not sell as much natural gas for people heating their homes. So I like to see a little bit more. At, I think, $6 million or $7 million is about the fund balance in that utility system. I would suggest that you probably want to pull down no more than $1 to $2 million of that to spend on capital outlay for whatever projects you all may be considering, and then funding the rest of that through debt. The rating agencies will take a stance if you were to spend down, say, $4 million of that you've burned through a ton of your available cash, and then it's really just put the utility system and the city in jeopardy of, one, a rating downgrade, but also an ability to weather that storm, whether it's a natural disaster, which is something that we've done a lot of work on in the coastal Bend area of Texas as a result of Harvey. Our clients who had very healthy general fund balances and just a stronger economic position, they were able to weather the actual storm and the aftermath of Harvey through rebuilding. And you know, there's a big gap of time between when FEMA reimburses them, that they're spending cash out of their own pockets for debris cleanup and, you know, picking up water towers that fell down and things of that nature. And having that cash on hand does play a crucial role. Obviously, we're not as prone to a natural disaster in this part of the state, but those are some of the reasons that they like to see that conservative approach. Certainly, you've got a very high fund balance that you're absolutely to be commended for, and I think that conservative approach to governance has paid dividends for you all. It's something that I would not want to see stripped all the way bare to fund certain projects, but there's certainly some flexibility in there that I think you could put some of that cash to good use rather than having it continue to remain just in available cash in the city's coffers. One of the things that's come up, and I'm sure you all have been briefed on, the impact of the 86th legislative session that concluded over a month ago. Your rollback rate has historically been capped at 8%. Your ability to raise your property taxes at your revenue at 8% annually. You have that ability this year for the last time, then that's going to drop to 3.5%. And so that'll be an additional hindrance for cities. That's a concern all across the state. And so with that in mind, having some of that cash on hand will also be important for the simple fact that your HR costs, whether it's salary, health insurance premiums, they're going up more than 3.5% annually. Your ability to increase your revenue stream to cover those types of adjustments is hindered, and that cash may be handy to offset some of those costs in future years. That's something worth keeping an eye toward. And with that in mind, one of the other funding mechanisms that you all have used in the past, and most people have, is capital leases. And those are held on the general fund side of the ledger. And they've typically carried a higher interest rate than you would go out and borrow a tax note for, but they're held on the maintenance and operations side of your tax rate that's capped at that what will be 3.5%. We like using tax notes in place of capital leases. One, because it's backed by the full faith and credit of the city, so you get a better interest rate. But two, because it must be held on the interest and sinking side of your tax rate, and that's not subject to that 3.5% cap. So your ability to continue to fund and leverage through a tax note versus a capital lease, and these could be for things like police vehicles, to a lesser extent, you see copiers and different things done through capital leases. To the extent we can move those and maybe even gather them up, different projects, to get some real economies of scale and issue a tax note or a certificate of obligation for that, is going to help alleviate pressure that's going to be coming over the next several years on your maintenance and operations side of your budget. And so that's one thing that I visited with Mr. Torres about. It has to be a certain dollar size for that to make sense, but by and large, the interest rates are always better when you borrow on your own name rather than the property being secured by an annual appropriation of the council, because that just represents a greater risk to the lessor. The second page that I've attached here is just a pro forma analysis of your utility system. And this is just a very, very straightforward looking at from your 2018 CAFR, your revenues less your expenditures and what is available for debt service, then adding the debt you already have outstanding to show how much debt could you take on, or for if you had a $6 million project, could you afford to take that on? And this is a little bit of an unfair analysis because it's just a snapshot in time from your 2018 audit of what that impact would look like. It doesn't take into consideration transfers back out to the general fund or maybe large capital outlay expenditures that you all have planned. And so this is really just a starting place. But ultimately it shows, and I think you all already know this, your utility fund's in great shape. You've got revenues that outstrip your expenditures, and so you have capacity to fund future projects with long-term debt, such as certificates of obligation, as you have done in the past. And so as those projects come to light, certainly we're happy to continue to go through the iterative process of analysis to determine that. One thing that we're seeing over the last 2 weeks, and you all have probably seen, interest rates are falling off of a cliff. The Dow Jones continues to sell off as trade war with China and these different headlines kind of grab hold of the market. Bond interest rates are now back at their historical lows. Sold certificates of obligation last night in Fort Worth, or city around Fort Worth. The true interest cost, roughly the average interest rate, was 2.06%. That's a level that we haven't seen since 2016, and in 2016, those were the all-time lows in the bond market. Never been lower. So it's an advantageous time to borrow. It's not to say that it will remain that way, but the Federal Reserve cut their short-term borrowing rate 2 weeks ago, a quarter point. We'll continue to see whether they continue to cut rates, but that's of course also going to lead to lower interest rates. So when you need to borrow, it's a good time now. Interest rates do remain very, very low. Both of these numbers that you're looking at in front of you are very, very conservative. You'd be borrowing around 2% for 20-year debt right now, and on the tax note, you'd be somewhere below 2% as well. So, Mr. Vela, Ms. Torres, if I've left anything off that you wanted me to cover, otherwise I'm happy to answer any questions that you all have or concerns that you all may have about kind of the outlook from here.
had information at our last budget retreat that was given out that stated that we were prohibited and could not move any money from our utility fund to our general fund, but you're saying that we can. It's possible.
I'm not sure what would have been said that it's prohibited. I'm not sure maybe the nature of those funds. That gets maybe into a bit of a legal realm, and I'm not a lawyer.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, certainly cities make transfers, and it's
Right.
not something that we recommend. I'll say that, because I work with a client up in the Panhandle that has gotten into quite a bit of financial trouble by being overly reliant on their utility system. But in a pinch, you can certainly move those dollars, to my knowledge. But that's something that I think may need to be researched with your legal counsel.
Sure. Sure. I know some cities have it in their charter that the charter prohibits those transfers, but we do not have that as a prohibition in our new city charter.
Okay.
So we'll continue to explore that. I just wanted to throw that out there.
Okay.
But you're saying it would be better, I think I hear you saying, it would be better to borrow against the 6 million or borrow 6 million straight up as a certificate of obligation, which,
Well, I think you could certainly do that. I think there's also a middle ground. What I would not want to see is spending down all of those reserves. And the rating agencies, they look at your general fund side, your ad valorem tax secured side of your budget. They want to see 25% of your annual expenditures held in reserve. That's actually higher on your utility side, but it's not the same metric. But they roughly want to see north of that 25%, closer to probably 50% in cash and cash equivalents held on your utility system. So my suggestion would be that whatever that comfortable level is, and no one understands the city better than your city staff to know really what your budget can handle, without getting into really risky waters, is maybe spend down $1 million or $2 million of that. In today's bond market, and I'll say this, and then tomorrow or a month from now, interest rates will have shot back up and this won't hold. But your short-term, your investment pool of what you're putting all of your cash into, whether it's Logic or Texpool, it's earning somewhere below 2%, or even well below 2%. Right now, you could borrow at 2%, and so it makes a strong case for leveraging yourself in such a low interest rate environment to go out and borrow, keep that cash held in reserve, or at least a large portion of that for that rainy day, because money's so cheap now. Interest rates shoot back up. Yeah, I think that then it's a consideration that how much you're going to spend on interest costs versus what that money sitting in the bank is actually earning for you.
thank you.
Any other questions?
In your packet, council, we do have information on different types of projects, both on the utility side, on the general fund side. If you've had a chance to look at that, water line replacements, replacement of wastewater collection lines, different types of systems for the water plant, source of supply, SCADA, the well field, and storage, totaling about a little over $6 million is what we have in mind right now. On the general fund side, 2020 equipment and vehicles requiring financing or savings, that's the next page. We're looking at things like 3 police SUVs, a brush truck on the fire side, a tire loader for the streets department, a dump truck for refuse, an additional ambulance for fire EMS, a backhoe in the water department that would be accounted for in the internal services fund. And then from general fund savings, and that's a total of about 1.1. And from general fund savings, we're looking at fire station building drainage replacement, outdoor warning sirens for the fire department, 3 SCBA air packs, battery-powered rescue tools for the fire department, street drainage improvements, animal shelter improvements, and an airport ramp grant capital improvement program. Those projects right there from the general fund savings totaling about $174,000 just for the benefit of folks in the audience and watching this on YouTube, hopefully. So that's kind of what we're dealing with, and that's the bottom line for us, is how can we put ourselves in the best position in saving the taxpayers the most money, and still get these projects funded and done.
Absolutely. I think, it's a decision for you all to make, obviously. How much of your fund balance do you want to spend down? To the extent that you do want to borrow, and for like the general fund projects, we want to match the useful life of the asset with the amortization of the debt we're taking out. So a tax note is capped by state statute at 7 years of a maximum maturity. That'd be a great vehicle for doing that. We're getting late in the budget process. If you said we need this equipment in this upcoming budget, and we want to include that in our tax rate, because if you sold debt today, you'd have to make your first payment February of 2020. You'd have to set your tax rate and then collect on it. We're out of time, or we're very close to being out of time there. What I would suggest, especially since you have the cash position, is for the council to adopt what's known as a reimbursement resolution. And that's just a legal piece of paper that says we intend to spend money out of our fund balance for these projects and reimburse ourselves with debt proceeds sometime in the next 18 months. And that would give you the flexibility to take on these projects as you see fit throughout the year. And then we can come back next year and sell a tax note when we close. The first thing you would do is reimburse your general fund for that project, and then you would incorporate those future debt payments into setting your tax rate in the 2021 budget. So that's one potential avenue for you all to consider. On the water wastewater side, I would suggest that we do exactly what we've done the last couple of times we've gone to market, and go through the Texas Water Development Board for those projects, assuming that they all qualify, and it sounds like that they all would. The Texas Water Development Board, as we've been the beneficiary of a few times at least, offers subsidized interest rates. So if you would borrow today at 2.06% on a 20-year loan, you'd get 165 basis points off of the current market rate you would secure. So it's very nearly free money to go through them. Now, there's a lot of hurdles and hoops that you have to jump through to work with a state agency such as the Water Board, and it's a longer process from start to finish. And that process begins with your engineers getting a project information form, a PIF, turned into the Water Board that basically just outlines in very broad strokes what the project is. Then the Water Board would invite the city to put in a full application. Once that application's approved, then we would be able to go and actually borrow the money, and it goes through the same process that if you went and borrowed in the public market to secure funding. But start to finish, it's a 9 to 12 month process, so it's not something that you can just kind of hop right into. But to the extent you're kind of out in front of these projects and you've got that kind of time on your hands, that's definitely an avenue that I recommend, just because you cannot beat. Especially, a project of $6 million, there's some real interest cost that comes with that. Probably $2 to $3 million worth of interest cost over the life of that debt. To the extent we can get rid of 75% of that interest cost, that's a huge savings for the city. So it's something I'd recommend, and certainly to visit with your engineers. And I know your engineers are well versed in the Water Development Board and know their way around that very well.
Anything else for Andrew?
All right.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, we now move to item 6, which is discuss, consider, and act upon approval of minutes for the meeting held on July 9th and July 25th.
Move adoption of the minutes.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Now move to item 7A, which is to receive proposals for health, dental, and life insurance employee benefits for 2019-20. Staff will work with broker of record to evaluate the proposals and will present recommendation to the council this September 10th, 2019 City Council meeting. Are these all yours? Proposals were opened at a public meeting on August 12th at 1:30 p.m. The following proposals were received: New York Whole Life, Blue Cross Blue Shield, UNUM, Emeritus, Omaha, Nebraska, and OCHA, OCHS. And they're all here.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. No,
No,
that's the bank.
That's the bank.
We'll now move to item 7B, which is discuss, consider, and act upon authorizing staff to receive competitive sealed bids for fuel, oil, and lube products and hot mix coal lay asphalt for use from October 19 through September of 20, and to advertise in the newspaper August the 18th and August the 25th for bids to be opened at a public meeting on September the 9th.
Move we authorize staff to go out for bids.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We'll now move to item 7C, which is discuss and consider and act upon awarding proposals for a 2-year bank depository agreement for the city of Sweetwater, Texas. Any questions of Patty? We've even got the banker here. Morning.
Morning.
Make a motion, we move forward with the new contract.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Approved. Thank you.
Thank you all very much, appreciate it. Thank you, appreciate you. Let's hope we can help you in any way. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thanks, sir.
You too.
All right. Now move on to 7D, which is discuss, consider, and act upon setting a public hearing for September 10th on the proposed budget for 2019-2020.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Now move to item 7E, which is discuss, consider, and act upon setting public hearings for September the 10th and September the 17th to discuss the proposed tax rate of .539 per $100 valuation for tax year 2019.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carried. City manager's report.
Yes, sir. I'd like to call Chief Madden up to talk about our hydrant maintenance. It's an exciting program we've got going on through the fire department.
It's been a number of years since we've done hydrant maintenance due to the lack of water and stuff like that. We're going around painting the ones that need it. We've made a map or gotten with Eddie actually sent us the map of what size mains are attached and things like that. This year we're actually going to start doing some flow testing as we're supposed to be doing through the Insurance Service Organization and other various alphabet agencies. We're waiting on the tool to get it so that we don't wash people's yards out when we do start this. But it'll tell us, the flow rate, the pressure, the residual pressure, things like that. We want to find out all this stuff out, especially once we get the new water tower up and all the PRVs going and in operation and all that type stuff. So you'll notice that they're going to be painted red. The tops, the bonnets of the fire hydrants doesn't indicate how crazy the neighborhood is. It's what type of water flow we expect to get out of the hydrant. NFPA standards, red is 500 and below, yellow is 500 to 1,000, green is 1,000 to 1,500, and blue is 1,500 and above. So that's why they're painted that way. We're going to be putting the blue markers back out, which should, in the past anyway, has indicated that we will have a snowy and icy winter because they all get snow plowed off right after we put them down, which is fine. And that's going to be going on throughout the city. You've noticed we tried to start downtown. beautify the ones we've got downtown that are really obvious and right there, concreted all the way around. So the guys are doing a really good job painting them and getting them looking good. We have to grease them with food grade grease, we found out. We spent a long time washing axle grease off of them after all the years of doing that. But they're all clean, been clean for many years. We use the expensive food grade grease to grease the caps and stems and everything else. We also started, if you have just a second, the training that the Regional Advisory Council has really pushed out and the state has pushed out called Stop the Bleed. And there are other trainings as well. The Citizens Response to Active Shooter event. I believe we've started training, doing a lot of different community events. This is training we put on for free for anybody, any club, any school, any church, any group that wants the training. We're happy to provide it for them. Just this month, we've trained 205 people, most of them teachers, some of them students, in Stop the Bleed and craze trainings. The last one we did was the 9th, which was Thursday last week at Cornerstone. And it's great training that you can use anywhere. It's not just for schools, it's for anywhere in your daily life that you find yourself with, certain types of medical emergencies and things going on. So just wanted to give a shout out to the guys that are doing that. That's a lot of work that we're just kind of taking on ourselves. The RAC has provided the training equipment, and as well as we give the kits away to schools and churches that we do the training at. So thank you.
How long does the training take?
Hour and a half, 2 hours for Stop the Bleed. The craze, I think, is 3 hours. I'm not sure. How long is that? You can do it in 2. Stop the Bleed, depending on how many people versus how many trainers. We give the presentation, which is usually right at an hour, and then we do hands-on training as well on how to use a tourniquet, how to pack wounds, direct pressure, different things like that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
And on the alarm permits, y'all will remember some time ago, the council approved that item, and so we've been working with a vendor to get that all taken care of online. And so it's on our website. You'll see here our homepage. If you click on alarm permit information and sign up, it'll take you to that page there. And at the bottom, you can apply for the permit, pay online, pay your bills, set up a username and a password, look at the demos and how it's all done, download and print your alarm permit application. And so that's all taken care of. I've spoken to folks that have had good experiences with this. It takes about 5 minutes or less, and then you've got your alarm permit, a number issued to you, and it's paid for the year, which I believe is $30 for residences, maybe, Chief?
I can't remember the exact fee off the top of my head. It's 30 for a resident and like 45 or 50 for a business.
For business, yes, sir.
50 for commercial and 30 for residential.
50 for commercial, 30 for residential. So if you haven't got your alarm permit, go to our website, go to our homepage, click on that link, and it'll take you. It's a very quick and easy process, and we'll get that taken care of.
Was there a senior citizen exemption in that?
I believe there is. For the churches, the school districts, I believe anybody over the age of 65.
You're already there.
But there's some other exemptions in there for certain types of, like, I think it's the schools, the churches, and there's something else I can't.
No veterinary clinics.
Oh, governmental entities, yeah. I'll look at it closer, but that's the exemption, the 65 and older is exempted.
Okay.
Roger that.
And we are looking, we have been working, staff has been really working very hard with the vendor that we selected on a new City of Sweetwater website. Ours has been around for a little while. It looks a little dated. This new one looks a lot more fresh, easier to navigate, all those types of things. We thought we might have an example of it to show y'all at this meeting, but the vendor didn't come through for us on that. But within the next couple of months, we'll have it live and online. So we're real excited about that project. Get people going to the website, give them information, be able to download your permits like the alarm permit we just talked about, pay their utility bills and those kinds of things. So we're real excited about that, and we'll give the council a sneak peek as soon as that's available. And Mr. Mayor, that's all I had.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Public input. Adjournment. You have a motion?
Make a motion, we adjourn.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.